This is a Film Stories original podcast.
Love this podcast? Support this show through the Acast supporter feature. It's up to you how much you give, and there's no regular commitment. Just hit the link in the show description to support now.
Hey, I'm Ryan Reynolds. At Mint Mobile, we like to do the opposite of what Big Wireless does. They charge you a lot, we charge you a little. So naturally, when they announced they'd be raising their prices due to inflation, we decided to deflate our prices due to not hating you. That's right. We're cutting the price of Mint Unlimited from $30 a month to just $15 a month. Give it a try at mintmobile.com/switch.
$45 upfront payment equivalent to $15 per month. New customers on first 3-month plan only. Taxes and fees extra. Speed slower above 40 gigabytes in detail.
This episode is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. Do you ever think about switching insurance companies to see if you could save some cash? Progressive makes it easy to see if you could save when you bundle your home and auto policies. Try it at Progressive.com. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Potential savings will vary. Not available in all states.
Ready to pop the question? The jewelers at BlueNile.com have got sparkle down to a science with beautiful lab-grown diamonds worthy of your most brilliant moments. Their lab-grown diamonds are independently graded and guaranteed identical to natural diamonds, and they're ready to ship to your door. Go to BlueNile.com and use promo code LISTEN to get $50 off your purchase of $500 or more. That's code LISTEN at BlueNile.com for $50 off. BlueNile.com, code LISTEN.
This is Writers on Film, the only podcast dedicated to books on cinema. Hello everybody, my name is John Bleasdale. I am a writer and film critic, and this is Writers on Film. Today I'm going to be talking to Leon Hunt, who is a senior lecturer at Brunel University in London. He is the author of several books, and his latest is called Mario Bava, the Artisan as Horror Auteur. It's a really excellent survey of the cult Italian film director, hugely influential, and someone who has certainly come back into critical acclamation. If you enjoy the podcast, please remember to like, subscribe, spread the word as far and wide as you possibly can. You can follow me on Twitter at DrJohnTD, But before you do any of that, please enjoy the conversation.
Name was one that I knew several years before I actually saw any of the films, because all my early film books were horror film books, and the horror films that I knew at that point were, the Hammer films, the Universal classics, but you would see stills from Bava films in these books. So I was aware of him. The films weren't easy to see back then when I was growing up. They weren't really being shown on television. They weren't easy to see in the cinema. But he was someone that I sort of, was kind of a little bit obsessed with, even before I'd seen any of them. I just really wanted to see them.
There's something about that, seeing photographs in books that drives me crazy about wanting to see a film.
Yeah, and there are some where, it's years before you get to see them. And somewhere, you're watching a film and you think, oh, that's where that still came from, that image that's been, lurking in my imagination all these years. Only recently did I realise that Dennis Gifford's pictorial history of the horror film, which was the first film book I ever owned, has a still from Bava's Operazione Paura, Kill Baby Kill, as it's also known, of a sort of ghostly figure with a hand sort of held against the window. And you think, wow, I've had that image all this time. It was many years before I could put it in a context.
You're just waiting for it to come towards you in the dark. Yeah, I had the same thing with I think it was Robert Kolker's book Cinema of Loneliness. There was a still from The Wild Bunch, and it's just like the bloody mayhem afterwards.
Yeah.
I'm just thinking, how do they get there? You know, it just
yes.
seems such an amazing. So that really influenced my sort of wanting to see that film more than anything else. How would you describe Bava then for somebody who hasn't yet gone on the journey and, as a sort of introduction to him?
I think a word that comes up a lot with Bava is atmosphere. They're films that are high on atmosphere. It's interesting that when people talk about Bava, they nearly always downplay narrative. And there's a sense that, that's not what you remember about the films. You tend to remember them for particular sequences, and often they are atmospheric sequences. So they're films where the style is very visible, even though they were made on modest budgets. His earlier films lean very much towards the Gothic, a very stylized use of color, of colored gels to light different parts of the set in different colors. It's one of the signatures of his style. He's very fond of figures kind of floating towards the camera and sequences that kind of get under your skin. But some of them, not all of them by any means, but some of them are also quite startlingly violent, particularly for their time. So I think they're often also seen as forerunners of Dario Argento, who comes along later, particularly with Bava's thrillers like Blood and Black Lace are often seen as sort of forerunners of the Dario Argento thriller.
Yeah, talking a little bit about his reputation. You have a brilliant quote in the book where is it Monticelli says?
Oh, Mario Monticelli.
Yeah, Monticelli says, he back then Mario Bava was underrated. Now, thankfully, he's overrated.
Yes.
It's sort of like, it's kind of. I think that could be said about a lot of cultish passions. It's like the joy of discovering them means that you're gonna blow them up almost to compensate.
Yeah, and I think actually when you do sort of encourage people to watch Bava films, you don't do the films any favors unless you add some caveats. And because I do think they're films that you need to watch in a particular way, and you need to make certain allowances for. A lot of that, I think, comes down to that attitude towards, atmosphere. Does atmosphere compensate for the absence of other things? So I say, the fact the narrative is, and I think sometimes people slightly exaggerate the weakness of the narratives, but they're certainly not the strongest thing about the film. The acting isn't the best thing about the film. The characters aren't hugely engaging. And I also think they're films where your engagement is perhaps intermittent. There are they're very much films that you enjoy in parts, I think.
That sounds, intermittent. You mean there are bits that are a bit boring?
Yeah. And I think Bava is one of those directors where you can really tell which parts of the film he was interested in and which parts it's like, well, we've got to get through this bit. We've got to have these two people talking to each other. There's a bit in The Whip and the Body where two characters talking to each other, and it's a boring bit of exposition. And the camera just wanders off and does this kind of circular track and ends up on a vase with some roses in it. And there's this sense of, well, we've got to do something, we've got to have this scene, but we've got to keep it visually interesting somehow.
That's so good. And that sort of style as well. That sort of, that thing about narrative not being the top priority. There are some, incredibly well-respected directors. also used to say, plotting is boring and it's not interested in the plot at all. And even someone like Leone, So, Once Upon a Time in the West, I've never really understood the story of that film. It's sort of like halfway. It makes sense at the beginning and it makes sense at the end, but there's no middle to that film. It's just sort of you're just waiting to get to the final gunfight at the end. What about speaking of Leone as well? What about the context? Because I think Monticelli's point as well was is kind of clearer when you understand the context of the Italian cinema at the time. So could you sort of give us a bit of context? When was Mario Bava mainly active, and what was the situation in the Italian film industry at that time?
Yeah, so Bava had started off as a cinematographer and a camera operator, and and also special effects. And his father had done that before him. His father went back to silent cinema, and he'd never intended to be a director. But by the late 50s, Italy they'd had an unexpected hit with a film called Le Fatiche di Hercule, which became better known as Hercules internationally. And that was a sort of modestly budgeted film which made a ton of money in Italy, mainly in the second and third run cinemas. So there was a kind of a three-tier system in the exhibition sector where you'd have what they called the prima visione cinemas, the first run cinemas, where the big prestigious films, the ones that would be expected to make a lot of money, would go in. And then there would be the second run and the third run. And over time, there would be some films that would go straight into the second and third run cinemas, where there would be a very, very fast turnover. There was also just like a ridiculous number of cinema screens by the 60s as well, both official and also less official ones, where you'd screen a film in a piazza or a church hall or something like that. So this sort of made it apparent that there was money to be made from films like Hercules, and they spawned a whole cycle of films about Hercules and Maciste. And Bava really made the transition from cinematographer to director under this system, because he was the cinematographer on the first Hercules film, contributed a great deal to making the film look a lot more expensive than it actually was, and also gained a reputation for sort of finishing off films that ran into trouble. And so as a result of this, was allowed to make his own film, which is La Maschera del Demonio, which became known as Black Sunday. So there's
quite a few of these films, we have to point out, have like 3 or 4 different titles.
Oh, and sometimes a lot more than that.
So when was the Maschera del Demonio? When was Black Sunday?
That's 1960.
Right.
So that's his official debut. But he'd finished off a couple of films before that. He'd worked on a film called I Vampiri, which is the first Italian horror film, which was directed by Riccardo Freda, who's another sort of interesting figure in relation to Italian horror during this period. And Freda was notoriously temperamental and had kind of stormed off the set at some point. So Bava kind of finished off the film. I think that was well into production, but then they did another film together called Caltiki the Immortal Monster, where apparently Freda left the film much earlier. And so Bava directed most of that film. So he started directing films quite by accident, really. And it was known that, he was someone with enormous technical skills. He could make films. I mean, this is the other reason why these films are doing so well, is that they were just punching well above their weight in terms of production values. And also there was American money floating around in Italy during this time. There were frozen funds, and there were American productions that were using facilities at Cinecittà. And there were, Sergio Leone was doing second unit work on I think Sodom and Gomorrah for Robert Aldrich. I think he actually finished that film off for Robert Aldrich, because sometimes the Hollywood directors would sort of run into difficulties. I think that happened to Jacques Tourneur on The Battle of Marathon, and Bava sort of finished part of that film off. So it's a period of like massive overproduction, and sometimes production companies which would set up, sometimes they'd make 1 or 2 films and then dissolve, and then another company would form. There are lots of cinema screens, so there's a need for lots of films to fill up those screens. Because in the third run cinemas, the program would change every day, and television hadn't really fully taken off yet. in
during that
Italy.
period, I think you had like one channel on Italian TV. And
there was Rai Uno, I think. What became Rai Uno.
And they because it's like them not saying BC when it's actually BC because we haven't started counting yet. But the cinemas themselves, you make this really good point. The cinema going experience would change depending on what cinema you're going to, in the sense that what level of cinema you're going to. If you're going to the prestige cinema, you buy your ticket, you sit down, you watch the film as part of a theatrical experience. But if you go to one of these grindhouse or more local cinemas, it's more like you're going to a social gathering that there happens to be a film showing.
And people might arrive halfway through, and yes, they meet up with their friends. It was often a kind of rowdier experience, and I imagine there were equivalents to that in other places as well. The grindhouse cinemas in America. I think there were similar viewing experiences in Hong Kong, when in the heyday of Hong Kong cinema, where you'd get it'd be a very distracted audience, and that therefore. Again, that might be one of the reasons why the films are stronger on set pieces than they are on the kind of the linking material. Although most of the films that Bava made did get at least a brief run in the first run cinemas, because Hercules had started off in the Prima Visione cinemas, but then it had made most of its money in the second and third run ones.
And also maybe the choice of the strong generic element of Italian cinema as well, that it falls into these genres very readily, rather than I guess you have neorealism immediately after the Second World War, but by the 60s and 70s it's the genre films which are taking precedence.
Because there are so many of them, and you'd get a film that was a hit, and then you get next 2 or 3 years, lots of films like that. I mean, Italian horror, it never really, in the home market, it didn't, certainly in the 60s, produce a kind of breakout hit of a kind of fistful of dollars Hercules type. Italian horror didn't really catch on with Italian audiences until Dario Argento. And I think that's what...
And even he started doing stuff that would be more considered sort of crime thrill.
Yeah, Argento came in through the Giallo door, and I think that was his way of establishing a kind of audience for an Italian horror film. I think he found a way of kind of bringing it home.
And you look at Bava. So we have this idea of Bava as this sort of troubleshooter, this guy who can come in and fix stuff. He's very practical. He knows how to do stuff. You get a lot of bang for your buck. He can make a low budget film look like a medium budget film. Not exactly. Yeah. And yet he doesn't kind of critically, he doesn't fit into sort of an auteur theory of cinema. He's not necessarily writing his own stuff. And he doesn't do the interviews that you would want an auteur director to have. So you mentioned at one point that sort of the idea of going to the cinema for Mario Bava was like a busman's holiday. It's like, I'm doing this. Why would I want to go and see a film? To relax.
He was much more of an avid reader than he was a film goer, and I think he did largely regard cinema as work. And it was work that he enjoyed, and I think he took pride in it. But, I mean, I suppose there's always a danger of taking what filmmakers say too much at face value, and certainly his interviews give the impression that he didn't take it very seriously. He was interviewed a bit more later when he was doing Diabolic for Dino De Laurentiis, because that was a higher profile film. He was interviewed a bit more around the time that he was making that film. But he was often saying things that were really not very helpful to his reputation. One of the interviews he did while he was making Diabolic, he said, all cinema is made for infantile brains, which I'm sure is exactly what De Laurentiis would have wanted him to say to publicise the film. Or later, when he dismissed all of his films, he said, I never made a good film. All my films are grandi stronzate, is how he sort of described them. It's like a load of shit, basically.
Yeah, great bullshit. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, it just sounds like Pete Townsend just dismissing rock and roll. You know, rock and roll's just for a bunch of idiots.
Yeah.
Oh God, I miss the days when publicists didn't have an iron grip on their.
Yeah.
But then again, judging by David Mamet's recent comments, there are still plenty of people out there who can just
the loose cannons are still out there.
Yeah, exactly. There's not, Will Smith, another one. Anyway,
Yes.
So let's not get onto that.
Yeah.
Let's not get. That's another horror story, and one that's far less entertaining. So we've got Bava sort of building his career, as a troubleshooter in the Italian film industry, then making his own films and beginning to define a genre throughout the 60s. Do you see how do you see his development as a director? Do you see him sort of making quite big steps, and if so, in what direction? How would you formulate it?
I think it's a career that sort of lends itself to being periodized to a certain extent. I think that's shaped less by him sort of, a sense of progression than by moving in different circumstances. So I'd say for about the first 4 years of his directorial career, it's a period of relative stability, because there was a production company that he was very closely linked to called Galatea, who'd made the Hercules films, and he did La Maschera del Demonio for them and a few other films. And he was someone they relied on a lot. He'd fixed films for them. And he had a regular team around him as well. He had a very good camera operator. His editor was Mario Serandre, who went on to bigger things, working with Visconti and people like that. And so that was a kind of period of a relative stability. And I think those are some of the most polished films that he made during that period. And I think a lot of there's a lot of sheer craft on screen in those films. They're beautifully lit. I think particularly the Galatea productions, they gave him a bit more time to get things right.
What would those films be, just for our listeners who haven't?
Well, La Maschera del Demonio I've mentioned. A film that's known in English as Black Sabbath. The original title is I Tre Volti della Paura. It's an anthology film. 3 episodes introduced by Boris Karloff.
Yeah, that's the crazy one where at the end Boris Karloff is kind of the camera pulls back and he's in a film studio.
He's on a dummy horse at the end and sort of the camera pulls back and we see people running around him with branches of a tree. And
that's something Imamura does on one of his sort of fake documentaries, A Man Disappeared. He sort of has this brilliant story. It's a Japanese documentarian, filmmaker generally, and right at the end he just sort of breaks the walls apart and you realize what you thought was something being captured as a documentary was actually completely staged. And this is would be similar period as well, but I mean, it's not quite it's not got that level of kudos, but the idea is certainly there of look at this, look at what's happening.
Yes.
And Fellini does it as well. Fellini does it.
Yeah, I mean, I think that of kind of the respectable Italian cinema, I think Fellini has the sensibility that is closest to Bava's in some ways, because Fellini has that fondness for fantasy. And people often point out the similarity between Fellini's Toby Dammit and Bava's film Operazione Paura, because they both have the blonde girl with the bouncing ball, who's a kind of vengeful ghost in Bava's film and is the incarnation of the devil in the Fellini film. So yeah, there's those two, and a film called The Girl Who Knew Too Much, which is a black and white thriller. So those are some of the ones that he did for Galatea. But I think also other films he was making during that period, he was making with the same team. Blood and Black Lace was made for a different, that was a co-production with Germany and France. And that's still got that sort of very, very beautifully crafted kind of look to it. Then a few things change. I think Italian cinema hit one of its many crises. Galatea went under, and he sort of becomes, I think, much more of a gun for hire, and looks a bit more like a gun for hire. So there's a kind of middle period where there are some real standout films like Planet of the Vampires, for example. It's a sort of outer space gothic horror film which looks way better than it has any right to, considering I think it's largely equipped with some dry ice and a few rocks. But he's sort of, it's one of those exercises in what marvels Bava can pull off with next to nothing. And Operazione Paura, Kill Baby Kill, which I think is a favourite with Bava's admirers. But also you start to see him do films which are kind of less suited to him, particularly the westerns. He did 2 or 3 westerns, which wasn't really his genre. He did a Franco and Ciccio film, which
they're pretty dreadful. I mean, they have like very funny faces, and there the comedy ends.
They're an acquired taste, I think, Franco and Ciccio. Yeah, but also he did 2 things for De Laurentiis. He did Diabolic, which was a sort of moderate success, and he worked on a TV series of The Odyssey, which was mostly directed by Franco Rossi, but Bava did the episode with the Polyphemus, the Cyclops, which is actually one of the most frightening things I think Bava ever did. I think I generated probably a lot of nightmares, I think, for any sort of younger audiences watching it. So there's a kind of moment where he could have gone into the mainstream, I think, rather more if he'd wanted to. But apparently he found De Laurentiis unbearable to work with. I mean, he was used to producers who, as long as you hit the right commercial marks, they didn't really care what he did. Whereas, De Laurentiis was very hands-on. It very much saw himself as part of the creative process. So he kind of retreats, I think. And then you get a final period where I think things are, tastes are starting to change. Dario Argento, of course, appears and is very successful, and Italian thrillers become much more popular and successful. I think Bava is starting to get a bit tired of making certain kinds of films. He's trying to do new things. There are problems. Some of the films have problems getting released. One of the films was never released in his lifetime because the production company collapsed. Cani Arrabbiati, which is a kind of kidnapping sort of heist movie, and Lisa and the Devil, which never got an Italian or an English language release in its original version, and had to be it was reconstructed basically as a demonic possession film called House of Exorcism.
Is that the one with Telly Savalas?
Yeah.
And, he originates his lollipop sucking in that.
Yeah, that's the one.
which he then transported over to Kojak.
Yes.
Because I remember seeing it and thinking, that's a bit crazy that Telly Savalas is playing Kojak in the movie.
Yes.
Then I looked at the dates and realised, oh, okay, no, this was beforehand. So it's yeah.
Yeah, that was kind of that was meant to be his dream project. He just made sort of quite a successful film called Baron Blood, which American International had picked up.
With Joseph Cotton.
Sorry?
With Joseph Cotton.
Yeah, Joseph Cotton, yeah, and Massimo Girotti. And AIP had picked up a few Bava films over the years and done, they'd done really well with, when La Maschera del Demonio became Black Sunday, they had a really big hit with that. That was their most successful film to date. So they'd had another hit with that. And then apparently after he made Lisa and the Devil, Sam Arkoff, the AIP head, was very eager to see it and pick it up. And then after he saw it, was somewhat less keen on picking it up. Because it's a very strange film. It's like a kind of odd mixture of an old dark house movie with almost Last Year in Marienbad. It's got this sort of, because it does these kind of weird time shifts, and suddenly we're sort of back and we're not quite sure where or when we are.
But that sort of reminds me that the most famous, probably one of the most famous effects in a Bava film is that the sort of circular chase where people running after someone, you start realizing that the person in front is actually the same.
Yes, in Operazione Paura, Giacomo Rossi Stewart sort of chasing a figure through the same room, over and over again, and then catches, and it's his doppelganger.
Yeah, and that's such a, in some ways, it's such a sort of like cheap trick, if you like. But he sells it so well.
Yeah.
That is also a sort of something that, it could be just like a horror trope or a ghost story trope or something like that. But it also has elements of sort of Kafka to it and surrealism and who did those movies? The Beauty and the Beast and
Cocteau.
Yeah, exactly. That sort of.
Yeah, there's quite a bit in that film that is kind of reminiscent of Cocteau, because there are candelabra holders that are like human hands, and that's very similar to, I think it's La Belle et la Bête that has the armed human arms holding torches.
Yeah, absolutely. But I mean, that's what's fascinating about him. He's dipping into all of these genres, and he's doing these genres, and there are these elements to them that just seem to sort of rise out of the films and become something else.
Yeah. I mean, that was something that I think those critics who were sympathetic to the films often picked up on, the fact that you could draw parallels with people like Cocteau, with people like Franjou, who were doing similar kinds of things that were being taken more seriously. But Bava was doing them in, Serie B cinema for sort of Italian grindhouses.
And he does have, you mentioned the candelabras earlier, and also, I think another thing which goes with the atmosphere is the sort of furniture of these films as well.
Yeah.
The sort of the set dressing and the look of everything.
Yeah, it was something that the American reviews often would pick up on, where they'd say, "Oh, the story's nonsense, and the acting's terrible, and the dubbing's atrocious, but the production values are surprisingly good." They'd often at least get a kind of tick for that.
Yeah, but I mean, I think that's one of the joy of those films. It's a joy I certainly felt with like Hammer growing up. Was I just like the Roger Corman, Edgar Allan Poe movies? I just liked being in those houses.
Absolutely.
The dusty portraits, and all that sort of stuff.
Yeah, I mean, Hammer and Corman also are examples of, a cinema that is punching way above its weight. Their production values look way, way better than their budgets really should have allowed them to do, because they just had these fantastic technicians working on them. Great cinematographers, they've got Bernard Robinson at Hammer doing the set designs, and often, the same sets over and over again. But you just tweak them a little bit so it just looks slightly different.
Or the same shot over and over again.
Well, yeah, Corman was notorious for doing that. I mean, Corman was the only one who actually recycled footage. I mean, how many times do you see those burning rafters from Fall of the House of Usher?
Yeah, absolutely. Was it in your book? I'm sorry, I'm reading so many film books at the moment. There was an anecdote about him sitting watching Fall of the House of Usher and saying, you'll see in this one I've gone really...
Yes. It's his commentary on the Tomb of Ligeia, where he's sort of saying, because that was the last in the series, and he's saying, I'm really pleased with this, because this time I didn't just burn the house down, I came up with a different ending. We come to the end of the film, house burns down, goes, "Oh, apparently I did burn the house down again at the end." Of course you did, Roger. That was your default ending.
Oh, that's so good. That's such it's so heartwarming in more ways than one. That sort of like aesthetic, and also the good sense to not waste too much money.
Yes.
One burning house, it looks very much like another. Why burn down two houses?
I mean, I think it's something that Corman and Bava, I mean, in some ways I think they were very different people. But I think something that both of them had in common, I mean, as you say, you can make those, with Bava, you can make those connections to Cocteau and so on. Mask of the Red Death, the Corman's often compared with Bergman, and I think invites you to make that comparison. That both of them, you know, there's what seems to be a genuine artistic impulse there, but at the same time, a real pride in doing things as cheaply and quickly as possible.
Yeah, it's like that's. I get the feeling some directors, when they get together, that's what they talk about most. You see how much I saved on that?
Yeah,
you know, what the price was on that. And so,
yeah.
It's the ingenuity and the craft involved in making something look expensive when in fact it's quite cheap. I think is must be part of the gas of making films.
Yeah.
So you've got Bava sort of going through a series of genres from horror to the giallo in terms of you mentioned it earlier, Murder and Black Lace, was it?
Blood and Black Lace.
Blood and Black Lace, sorry, yeah. Which is the fashion industry one, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
It's a serial killer, and it's a series of elaborate and really kind of quite horrible deaths, if I remember.
Yeah.
And that seems to very much prefigure Dario Argento and to some extent maybe even Fulci. I remember that was possibly my first Bava. I think that was my first.
That's quite an introduction, that one.
Yeah, it's quite full on, isn't it? Yeah, because he's got the old black gloves and the point of view and all that sort of stuff going on. And has that film been remade? It feels like it's an influential film.
Yeah, it's one of those films that I think over time, it's now seen as a seminal film.
Explaining football to the friend who's just there for the nachos? Hard. Tailgating from home like a pro with snacks and drinks everyone will love? An easy win. And with Instacart helping deliver the snack time MVPs to your door, you're ready for the game in as fast as 30 minutes. So you never miss a play or lose your seat on the couch or have to go head-to-head for the last chicken wing. Shop Game Day Faves on Instacart and enjoy $0 delivery fees on your first 3 grocery orders. Offer valid for a limited time. Other fees and terms apply.
A little self-care can go a long way, especially amidst the hustle and bustle of the holidays. That's where Vegamore comes in. Trusted by millions, Vegamore is all about giving your hair the love and care it deserves. With their vegan and cruelty-free formulas, you can nourish and revitalize your strands while indulging in some much-needed pampering. Because let's face it, who couldn't use a bit more me time this time of year? Go to vegamore.com/ACAST, code ACAST. That's vegamor.com/ACAST, code ACAST.
And at the time, it had no immediate influence whatsoever. Because the other, when I think of the other Jali from the 60s, I mean, the most sort of typical Jali from the 60s were the ones that Carol Baker made at the end of the 60s, where she's a kind of wealthy widow, and then someone's plotting against her to get her money, or trying to drive her mad, or to get her to, and you get it. They're all sort of very Les Diaboliques in their kind of plotting. Whereas Bava's seem to sort of look to something that hasn't quite taken shape yet. And it took, Dario Argento eventually admitted to having been influenced by Bava's earlier thrillers, but I think it was something he was reluctant to acknowledge for a long time. But I think something like Blood and Black Lace, which was, one of the sort of co-financers of it was a West German production company. And Germany had a kind of whole series of Edgar Wallace thrillers going on at around the same time, which in some ways have like the same kind of elements in them. There's a police investigation, there's a series of murders, there's some titillating things, there's some scary bits. There's usually a lot of comedy in the German ones as well. And Blood and Black Lace sort of feels like it's kind of taking some of those elements, but sort of saying, no, here's how you do it. You'll do it in color. We'll make the murders much more violent. We'll push the titillation much further. It's like I always think it's kind of like a really lurid book cover that's come to mind come to life.
Yeah, like a sort of pulpish, a woman on the bed with a strapless dress and that sort of stuff.
Yeah, because I think a lot of these films from the 60s, I think it's it's like a kind of cinema of the newsstands. The edicola in Italy, where you get the cheap paperbacks and the fumetti, and these kind of titillating, lurid, sort of violent, pseudo-erotic covers, and they're mixing horror and science fiction and crime and all sorts of things, and the films seem to be really feeding off a lot of this kind of stuff.
Yeah, you also. I was surprised when I first arrived in Italy. I lived here now for a good 2 decades, and even like the news reports when there's it's called cronaca nera, when the sort of crimes have happened, or there's been a shooting, or even if there's been a particularly violent car accident, they'll like show like puddles of blood, and they'll show bodies, maybe hopefully covered, but whereas in England, certainly not at the time that I left, they wouldn't be doing that. That would be considered too far for the 6 o'clock news or the midday news even. But here there would be a real sort of like, what happened to Piccolo Samuele? Well, look, here's the splash of blood on the wall.
Yeah.
And you'd be like, oh my God. So that sort of, I don't know, ghoulishness? I don't want to morally judge it too much, but that kind of acceptance of violence and sort of was much more pronounced. So even, as I said, even in this sort of like daily, as you say, the edicola, the newsstand, the newspapers themselves are right next to the pulp novels.
Whenever I watch an Italian film from the 60s or 70s and there's a scene near the edicola, I'm always like, immediately I want to freeze it and see what are they selling, and just this is, and the ones, I mean, it's much tamer now, but the ones from back then, it's like borderline pornography, like on the kind of the newsstands and these kind of violent comics and paperbacks.
I guess it's maybe the influence of the Vatican as well. You have a very sort of repressed society in one sense, and then you kind of got to get it somewhere. So in a way, violent crime gives, it's a kind of excuse for pornography. You can't go out and buy just pornography, so you buy this and it's basically scratching that itch anyway, which is, highly problematic, obviously, when you're doing that in the midst of a society which is pretty misogynistic to begin with.
Yeah.
And that's something else I wanted to ask you about. Well, not necessarily on the misogyny front, but we can come to that. But whenever I watch Bava's films, and to some degree Argento and to some degree Fulci, I do feel like I'm entering a different universe. That this is a different universe to a Stephen King universe, say, or a Romero universe, or there's less pity, there's less empathy. People are. Things are gonna. It's more. Corman's using Poe, and to some degree used a little bit of Lovecraft, but sort of the Lovecraft sort of cold, pitiless universe feels much closer to Bava than it does to Corman.
Yeah. It's not a cinema that invites you to engage very much with human beings. It doesn't particularly, and I think this is partly to do with they're very quickly made and they're kind of organized around sensations and spectacles, but no, there's not much of an invitation to feel much for what's happening to who. A comment that's often made about Blood and Black Lace is, and I think of a lot of Jali, is the difficulty in distinguishing one victim from the next.
Yeah, right. Different coloured hair. But,
yes, different outfits.
Well, it's about fashion. It's kind of about that sort of superficiality as well.
Yes.
So you sort of find out who the individual is just by the way they get killed.
Yeah.
But one of the other really influential films, or at least a film that when I watched it, I thought, wow, this feels like it's the beginning of other things. Now, I'm going to have to get the title right, though. Is it Bay of Blood?
That is one of its many titles.
Right. Okay.
It was, yeah.
Even
Even in Italy, it had two different titles.
Right.
So it was originally released as Ecologia del Delitto.
Right.
And then there was a problem with its distribution, so it was reissued as Reazione a Catena.
So chain reaction.
Yeah. And then in America, it went out under a number of different titles. Twitch of the Death Nerve was the best of them, I think. That is a fantastic title.
Yeah.
Rather bizarrely, it became Last House on the Left Part 2 at one point. And Carnage, it was known as. It was released in the UK, very, very delayed. About 8 or 9 years later, heavily cut as Bloodbath.
Right.
But Bay of Blood seems to have become the most certainly in the UK, most of the release versions seem to have defaulted to that title now.
And that feels to me like a real Friday the 13th.
Yeah.
Sort of proto. It's a bunch of people being killed in a really interesting series.
Yes. Yeah. It's murder after murder after murder. I mean, there are two people killed in the opening scene. One of whom is the murderer of the first person.
Yes.
So it really hits the ground running, and it keeps on going.
Yeah, I love that film, and I love you brought up going back to what we were talking about furniture as well. The design of the house as being really important. Yeah,
because they're all sort of trying to get hold of the ownership of this bay. Because it sort of belongs to a wealthy countess who's bumped off in the opening scene, and there's a guy who wants to turn it into a luxury resort, and there are other people who want to sort of preserve nature and keep it as it is. So there's this kind of elaborate chain of murders, but there's one point in the film where they obviously thought, we're just not killing enough people. And it just introduces this. It's the one point where it's most like a Friday the 13th film, because this sort of carload of teenagers arrive purely to be killed off. And they're the goriest murders in it. It's the one where there's the couple having sex and the spear goes through his back and comes out through her back and goes through the bed and sort of pins them both to the floor, which is actually used in one of the Friday the 13th films.
It's just like
all the others are very clearly motivated, but those four, it's like, we've got to have something else here.
It's just like they phone up. Is that Victims Are Us? Yes.
Yes.
We're a bit short-handed. Do you mind coming on Bay for this weekend? It's a brilliant film. That I'd do a rewatch, I think, and it's got. I'm not going to spoil it, but it's got one of the best endings.
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
It really goes with this point that I was trying to make earlier of like the universe is a cold
yes.
and terrible place.
Yes.
There isn't any hope. Don't abandon hope.
I mean, that seems to be the motto of nearly every giallo, really. That there's no empathy, there's no human warmth whatsoever. Everybody's out for something.
I kind of feel sorry for actors when I'm watching the film. I'm like, I feel so sorry for not only the character but for the actor, because you're not gonna get anything out of this movie except people loving to see you hurt.
And that film has a really good cast as well. It's got Laura Betti in it, Leopoldo Trieste. It's a very, very good cast.
It's all the faces pop up that you recognise from Leone movies, from Good Bad.
Yeah.
It's absolutely.
Yeah, Luigi Pistilli, who's in a few Leone films, is in it, and
doesn't he play Father Ramirez in The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly? He's like Tuco's brother.
Yes.
Yeah, that's famous. And one of the best bits of Ennio Morricone music in that movie. I mean, I love that. Yeah, well, obviously Morricone. What are you going to do? But the theme that he wrote for Father Ramirez is just superb.
Yeah.
So, what about you? I mean, I keep coming up with sort of like my favourites, if you like. But what's your sort of favourite? What's your where do you go to get your to scratch your Bava itch?
I think I have. How many favourites am I allowed? I find it very difficult to nail it down to one.
No, yeah, you can have a few. That's fine.
Okay, I'm going to come up with three. First, I would choose Diabolic because actually it was the first Bava film I ever saw, and I'm a big fan of the comic as well. I sort of became my travels to Italy. I just became obsessed with picking it up at the Edicola.
There's a new film as well, I think.
There is, yes. It's Luca Marinelli, yes.
That's right, yeah.
Yeah, it's rather good, the new film. But yeah, so I love the Bava film. I did a monograph about it a few years ago, a little monograph of the cultography series, and I just think it's sort of a model of how to do a comic book movie. Operazione Paura I've mentioned a couple of times. That's one I never tire of seeing. I think it's a film that really sort of kind of lures you in because it starts as though it's going to be a bit of a Corman knockoff. Sort of carriage arrives in an unfriendly location. The coachman won't take him any further. The locals are really hostile. And then it's like one wonderful scene after another. There's the bouncing ball, the blonde ghost, the wonderful cobweb furniture, Giacomo Rossi Stewart chasing himself through that room over and over again. And my third one would be The Girl Who Knew Too Much, which is the first of his thrillers. And it's one of his lighter films. I think to anyone who was sort of thinking of getting into Bava but maybe slightly put off by the violence and the gore, that's a good one to go for because, I say, it's kind of lighter in tone. It has some very nice suspense sequences in it, nice use of locations in Rome, lovely black and white photography. John Saxon is the male lead in it, who's always good value.
John Saxon's amazing. I
yes.
Him being in Planet Earth as well. That was one
yeah.
As well as Enter the Dragon. And
yes. It's an amazing career.
Yeah, just really sort of pops up here and there.
Yeah.
Nightmare on Elm Street as well.
Yeah.
Absolute scattergun career. But,
yes.
I've got a feeling he was one of those actors who gave really good lunches that just people.
Yeah.
Let's have him.
I think he's probably also one of those actors who made lots of films that he'd forgotten having made.
Yeah.
I seem to remember hearing somebody, I think it might have been Alan Jones, saying that someone asked him about, because he was in Tenebrae for Argento, and him not remembering having been in it.
Oh, yeah. I think there's a fair few of those actors in the 60s and 70s who have very little recollection
yes.
of what they did for one reason or another.
Yeah.
So one other film that you mentioned sort of is his late film when he's right at the end of his career, and is this very violent, sweaty kidnapping film, Cane Arrabbiati, angry dogs or rabid dogs, I guess you would say in English, which is a really effective, nasty crime film. Yeah.
It's very, I mean, if you didn't see the opening credits, it would not leap out at you as a Mario Bava film at all. It's not falling back on any of the things that he relies on. It's not got the sort of the beautiful camera movements. It's using a lot of natural light. It's very different in its tone. I think it's a film that unusually does require you to engage with the characters rather more than some of the others do in order to, and I won't give away the ending because it really is a gut punch of an ending. Yeah. But I think it does depend on you investing in that film in a particular way.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny because we were talking earlier about him not caring so much about narrative, but there are two of his twists are up there with the best twists I've seen.
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
I'm not necessarily, maybe twists aren't necessarily evidence of great plotting, but they certainly do something.
Yeah, I think they're I say, it's like a gut punch. I mean, I think a twist that sort of has that kind of effect, because obviously, a genre like the giallo, it has lots and lots of twists, but they don't always. The twists in those films don't always make much sense.
Yeah. I've never found, like, say, Deep Red, Profondo Rosso. I've never found the twist like, oh no, is that, or,
no.
for that matter, any Dario Argento, there's always a sort of like a twist, but it's never. It's like, oh, so it's one of the three that I thought it was.
Yeah, yes.
That you kind of obviously set up as well. It's not like I don't know. There are some films like I don't know. Well, a good one for me would be like The Mist, where the twisting end of that, as you said,
that's another gut punch ending,
exactly. Isn't it? It's visceral. It's sort of like, no, they can't go there. Oh, they're going there. Okay.
Yeah.
So, what other work are you looking at doing next? Where do you go from Bava?
That's a good question. I've been trying to think about where I want to go next. I mean, I'm working on an article at the moment, which is about. I mean, I mentioned the thrillers that Carol Baker made in Italy. She made a series of gialli, the end of the 60s and the early 70s. So I'm sort of writing something about those at the moment. What my next book will be, I haven't decided yet whether I might delve further into the giallo, whether I might delve further into Italian horror.
How did you get this connection with Italian horror and Italian film? Where is there a biographical sort of link for you, or what?
Well, as I say, I started off with that kind of fascination with Bava, and also I caught a few Italian horror films at the cinema in the 70s, although I didn't necessarily always register where they were from. They were very good at passing as kind of Anglo-American films. I think the first time I really registered the Italianness of an Italian horror film was Suspiria. And that was kind of one of those life-changing movie-going experiences. I saw it not on its very first release, but I think sort of about a second or its third run towards the end of the 70s. And I just thought it was, one of the most extraordinary things I'd ever seen. So I became really interested in Dario Argento. I wanted to see Argento's other films. I was still trying to, track down the other Bava films, and then it all kind of fell in. Once you're hooked in, and then at the end of the 70s, those Gothic films that Fulci was making were coming out. So it was, everything was kind of falling into place. It was becoming a sort of I'd always been a horror fan, but, Italian horror. And I think that the end of the 70s generally was a period where more people were starting to register Italian horror as something that was distinct. It wasn't just Mario Bava as a director who happened to be Italian. It was like by that point, I think there was a growing awareness he was part of something else. He was the start of it, or he was near the start of it. But that it was worth delving into a lot more, and then you discover the giallo, and then you find out the giallo wasn't quite what you first thought it was.
And it also has maybe something to do with the fact that these are films were films were being made. What do I mean by that? They were works of cinema, and they weren't sort of with an eye to the, say, home video market or anything, even though a lot of them, that's where a lot of people had access to them at first. But there's a sort of prestige to them, and there's something maybe that you get as well by simply being foreign that is that you get. It looks better than your budget. It's like the spaghetti westerns. They can use Spanish locations and it looks great, and it looks different and it doesn't look like California. And so you've already got a little bit of advantage, which isn't actually costing you any money. And there's the same sort of things true maybe of Italian horror, that you can see certain things that you're not used to seeing in say, an American or a British horror film.
Yeah, I think one of the differences between Italian horror and American horror during that period was the way the different way that their low budget registered or didn't. Because I think American horror films embraced the fact that they were low budget and were happy to look low budget. It's like, yeah, we're gritty, we're indie, we're outside of the mainstream. Whereas Italian horror films, it was like, no, we want to look expensive. We want to get into the best cinemas. We want to be in the prima visione. We want to get picked up for distribution and get shown around the world.
Actor.
Yes, yeah. We'll get some washed up drunk who's not worked in Hollywood for 20 years, and we'll get them in our film.
Let's get Rick Dalton over.
Yeah.
Operazione Dinamite.
Yes.
Well, by the way, what did you think of the Guadagnino Suspiria, the remake? The riff.
I actually really liked it. I mean, I found obviously you have to take it as a completely different thing, but I liked the fact that he just approached it in such a different way. Didn't try to, it's got to be brightly coloured and it's got to have all the gory stabbings. That it was a way of approaching it differently. So I really liked it.
I think it definitely earned its right to exist. In being separate enough from the original. I mean, I there was a bit of me that was just wondering, why don't you just make a sort of, an original? I mean, it wouldn't take that many tweaks for it.
I think that's a good point. Yeah, there was a side to it where you're thinking, you could have just called this something else. And said, well, I was influenced by Suspiria because I liked the idea of it being in a dance school, but otherwise it's a different film.
Brilliant. Okay, great, Leon. I've got one more question to ask you, though. You need to recommend a film book for me.
I am going to recommend a book which I read recently, which I just have to hand. It is by Tim Bergfelder. It's called International Adventures, German Popular Cinema and European Co-Productions in the 1960s. And this just sort of told me about films that I knew a little bit about, but not a great deal about, the German popular cinema of the 1960s. So it sort of chimed with my interest in the Italian cinema of that period. But, and I was particularly taken with I mentioned before, the German Edgar Wallace films, which I think have a lot in common with the Gialli of Bava and Argento. So it's a really good read. It's an academic book, but I think it's a very readable academic book, and it's one that really stands out from some of the books that I've read recently.
It is fascinating, this European sort of these different countries like Spain and Italy and Germany that have these huge traditions and huge wealth of films out there to see. And we do in England as well. There's a fair few. There's a fair few studios in England which are pushing out this stuff, which is well worth watching. But I don't know. There's something. Sometimes I think maybe we got too hooked on the social realism, prestige cinema sort of dichotomy that we our genre.
Yeah, I think a similar thing happens in social realism sort of got praised at the expense of Hammer and Amicus. I think in Germany it seems that when the new German cinema came in, there was a lot of sort of hostility directed at what was seen as the disposable popular cycles of the 60s. Italy, obviously, the genre films didn't get prioritized to the extent that art cinema and still neorealism, I think, was sort of hanging over a lot of that quite a lot as well. And then, what happens is another generation of scholars come along and say, well, actually, this stuff is really interesting. David Pirri was writing about Hammer and British horror and Italian horror and thrillers gets rediscovered. And I think the same thing is starting to happen. Maybe in Germany, it's been happening for a longer period with those kind of cycles of, I mean, we know about the Italian westerns, but there were lots of German westerns as well. The sort of the Karl May films, and
were they actually? They were called sauerkraut westerns.
Yeah, I don't know if Germans called them that.
No,
but,
fair enough. Yeah.
Yeah.
I know there was paella westerns.
Yeah, paella westerns, spaghetti westerns, Lex Barker.
Western.
Yeah,
a town called Bastard. I remember.
And there's the singer, not the song. I guess is kind of a British western as well. And that's
what would you call that? The steak and kidney pie western. Pie and chips.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, that's fascinating. I just love going into these. I think it's also great when there's a kind of cinema genre or a nationality that isn't immediately available, so that when you find it, there's that joy of discovery of like, there are hundreds of these films.
Yes,
I'm going to be here for some time. You know?
Yeah. I just bought a box set of those Edgar Wallace films, and I'm finding them really fascinating to watch. I think film cycles always become more interesting over time, doubly so if they're from a different national cinema. But sometimes when you live through them, their similarity kind of grates, and you find it irritating. Oh God, not another one. Oh, you've done that again. Yeah. But 30, 40, 50 years later, those little differences become really fascinating. Oh, you've pushed that in a slightly different direction.
Yeah, I think that's the way. I mean, like comic book movies, there's a sense of overkill now. But I think if they stopped making them for about 10 years, people would look back and go, geez, they're actually a really high level of quality for those.
Yeah.
For what they are. I mean, my problem with Marvel is always that they're kind of too good. They're kind of... there aren't any really bad ones. There's maybe one or two that aren't up to the level, but they're very competent at what they do. It's just that maybe what they do, all coming one after another, is ultimately too similar.
Yeah, and we're sort of we're at the moment we're living through that thing of they're too this or that they're too similar. But I have a feeling another 30, 40 years those Marvel films might look a lot more interesting than they do at the moment.
Yeah, absolutely. And some, like Logan and, various of the Batmans will really will stick out and be properly acclaimed.
Yeah.
Especially if we get rid of this frickin' fandom horse apples that go on.
That also helps. Yeah, because it's all of that sort of feeds into your response to these films. Of you're just aware of all these kind of culture wars going on around them as well.
Yeah, I mean, I love attending film festivals primarily because, well, there's loads of reasons actually, but one of the main reasons is you walk into a film, you don't know anything about it, and there's no reaction. Your reaction is going to be the first reaction. So, I remember walking out of Joker in Venice and just thinking, oh, it was great. I enjoyed that in a way that was totally innocent.
Yeah. By the time it had been released, it was impossible to enjoy that film.
Yeah. And it's kind of that innocence of like your first reaction. Yeah, it was problematic. It had a couple of things that I'm not an idiot. I can see it, but the experience of watching it was one of just sort of pleasure, But yeah. Oh no, what have I said? They'll be after me now. I'll get it from both sides now.
Yeah.
Okay, listen, Leon, absolutely brilliant conversation. Thank you so much for joining me. So that was our conversation, myself and Leon Hunt. Apologies if there was any distortion on the sound, because there have been a couple of local problems recently with the recording and the editing of these podcasts. Hopefully I'm smoothing it out, and I hope it didn't disrupt or mar your enjoyment in any way. I didn't want to mention it at the beginning of the podcast because, well, I don't want to discourage you, but also if you mention something like that, it might start preying on your mind. You might start hearing it when you wouldn't have necessarily noticed it. So if you didn't notice it and you're thinking, what's John talking about, then all the better that my plan has worked. Anything that I need to tell you this week? I don't think so. I don't think there's anything specific going on. Oh, I'll tell you one thing that did come out just before I was recording this, so it'll be a couple of weeks ago now, which is the Cannes lineup. I've just had an opportunity to glance through it. It looks really promising. There are the usual complaints about representation, both geographically and based on gender, all of which are, themselves valid. But I think if you're somebody who's been going to Cannes for any number of years, it's a very familiar, it's a sadly familiar refrain. But on the positive side, there are a lot of really interesting films that are coming up. David Cronenberg's new one, Koreeda, the Japanese director. Kelly Reichardt has got a new film in competition. Claire Denis has a new film in competition as well. So there seems to be a bunch of stuff that looks good. And usually what happens is with all of these festivals, the films that knock you for six are often the ones that you have no knowledge of prior to watching them. During Cannes, I'll see if I can do some recordings for Writers on Film and put them out as a podcast as well. Maybe just talk to a whole bunch of critics and ask them for their favourite film books or the film books recommendations, and then put those together and send them out. That might be a good use of my time. So all that remains is to thank Elliot Atkins for the music, Ali Harwood for the artwork, and thank you, listener, for spending some time with me. Until next week, goodbye.
$1-800-Flowers.com knows that a gift is never just a gift. A gift is an expression of everything you feel and helps build more meaningful relationships. 1-800-Flowers takes the pressure off by helping you navigate life's important moments by making it simple to find the perfect gift. From flowers and cookies to cake and chocolate, 1-800-Flowers helps guide you in finding the right gift to say how you feel. To learn more, visit 1-800-Flowers.com/ACAST. That's 1-800-Flowers.com/ACAST.
This episode is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. You chose to hit play on this podcast today. Smart choice. Make another smart choice with Auto Quote Explorer to compare rates from multiple car insurance companies all at once. Try it at Progressive.com. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Not available in all states or situations. Prices vary based on how you buy.
My dad works in B2B marketing. He came by my school for career day and said he was a big ROAS man. Then he told everyone how much he loved calculating his return on ad spend. My friends still laugh at me to this day.
Not everyone gets B2B, but with LinkedIn, you'll be able to reach people who do. Get a $100 credit on your next ad campaign. Go to linkedin.com/results to claim your credit. That's linkedin.com/results. Terms and conditions apply. LinkedIn, the place to be, to be.